evening, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. We are so grateful to be with you here today. And as Elena mentioned, my name is Dermot Foley. I'm the Associate Director of Online Education at Lehman College. Prior to that, I was at Hunter College for 11 years. Love both schools. Grateful to be a part of the community. And here's my dear friend who does all the work for me, and I take all the credit. His name is John McDonough. He's a wonderful instructional designer. And John, you came from?
John Jay College, and before that, I was at LIM College, which is a small business academy school.
And John's from Maine, the home of real fireworks. So I definitely try to be nice to John because he has a lot of explosives in his house. No. So as we begin, and we have a question, an important question about AI. AI really got really prominent and powerful back in November of last year because of ChatGPT 3.5's ability to have a browser incorporation for utilizing the platform, very similar to the Mosaic browser in 1994. And that development really, as President Delgado noted, was after decades of research, decades of work. But suddenly, because it became ubiquitous and available, it raised a lot of concerns with many of us on many levels in many fields, and specifically in higher education. Many people came to us with concerns about academic integrity and how that's going to be impacted possibly negatively or positively through the development of ChatGPT and other generative AI tools. When you think about this topic and in the intersectionality of it in higher education, we ask, like, what questions might you have about generative AI and or academic integrity? Would anyone like to share? Please, Dana, how are you?
My real question is, what kind of support are we as faculty going to get when we start seeing sentences that are as grammatically correct as the Daily News and the New York Post and Fox News, that clearly our bilingual and trilingual students never have written, and they are, bland as.
Okay, certainly.
Yeah.
It's a good
What kind of
point
support are we going to get to
go forth in this new era.
Sure. Get more real and more flawed writing back out of our students?
So you're sharing a concern that we're hearing from many faculty. Faculty, we're seeing products, written products that seem to be different in quality over different assignments. There are other concerns, as there always have been. And it raises questions about then, how do we go forth? How do we go forth in models of assessment and incorporation or non-incorporation? How do we go forth in clearly stating our obligations and expectations to our students in each and every course for these tools? Are there any other questions that anyone would like to share?
Yeah, the difference between ChatGPT 3.5 and ChatGPT 4.
Well, there's this difference, 4 costs, right? And so 3.5 is going to put probably enough on the plate to make you want more on that plate, and hence then you're going to have to get into the other version, the paid version, and that does have some extra tools that we're going to talk about. So when we're thinking about academic integrity, long before ChatGPT was ever in the game, it's really about people being honest with their work, making sure that that work is reflects their understandings, their comprehension. As you know, in assessment, assignments really do serve that function. It allows us as instructors to gauge how effective our teaching is, and also to give us greater insights as to how it's being comprehended by our students. When we think about generative AI outputs, we have to make sure our students don't get in a situation where they are not trying to plagiarize. They're trying to utilize tools. And so we have to think about then, okay, how can students respect faculty guidelines? The guidelines have to be prominently noted in the syllabi, whether it's no use, some use, all use, but it has to be there because we keep hearing stories across the CUNY campuses where a student in, say, for instance, Bio 104 is leveraging those tools and the faculty member is like, fantastic. And yet then they go to 105, different faculty member, different expectations, but not explicitly stating what they are. And so suddenly, well, I did it in 104, I'm going to do it in 105. And that assumption can lead to really negative consequences. Edited or cited according to the grading guidelines and attribution standards. As you know, generative AI, really MLA, APA, there are formats right now to cite it correctly and accurately. We have to be really careful about how we note how we're utilizing the tool. So when we think about generative AI, as many of you know, we have an input into these large language models, and these models basically turn words and phrases into numbers. I think of ChatGPT 4 right now, they call these tokens, there are about 12 trillion of them. And that is where the complexity and the difficulty arises. Because once you set the algorithm to identify the tokens and configure them and utilize probability algorithms, and there's 12 trillion of them, we get outputs sometimes that are completely infactual. They call them hallucinations or confabulations. And it's so complex and varying in these probability mechanisms that we can't easily identify why the mistakes are occurring. So as we all spoke earlier, we're looking at the four major ChatGPT, Gemini, Copilot, and Quillbot, the major generative AI platforms right now. And there are more every day. Gemini, as many of you know, used to be called Google Bard. Google rebrands everything every 10 minutes, but that's Google. Google's going to Google, guys. Copilot, interesting, from Microsoft, owns a dominant stake in ChatGPT. The engine of Copilot basically is ChatGPT. There are some interesting UI changes, though, in Copilot that I think might make them more applicable for certain students. I know they would have for me. And we'll be talking about that. And finally, of course, Quillbot, paraphrasing, rewriting. Paraphrasing can be very difficult, yet needed in academia when you're literally going over the ideas that you're then moving forward and built upon. We have to be careful we don't just literally check out that quote from that academic. We have to paraphrase. And it can be difficult, onerous to do. As you know, there have been a lot of cases recently about plagiarism charges on that exact skill, paraphrasing. So with all of this, we really have all these concerns. We have privacy concerns. You can't enter information into ChatGPT if it's too personalized, because you are providing ChatGPT the data that it then, in theory, is going to improve its accuracy with. So you don't want to really give too much private information. You have to be careful what you type into that. You have to think about bias and discrimination. It's worse than you can believe right now. There was a study by Bloomberg recently that looked at thousands of images. It said, give me an image of a judge. And the percentages on gender, on race, were far worse and more skewed toward white Caucasians than even than the actual numbers would relay. There, for instance, there was like 11% of the imagery that was of women who were judges, yet over 40% in the United States of our judges are women. We have to be very careful. And this also skews towards other occupations and other really unfortunate ways. We have gender and racial bias. It's very bad in some of these models. There's the idea about monitoring students. This is well before ChatGPT, of course. That concern continues. Of course, though, beyond monitoring them, we can think about ideas on how can we assess them with these tools in this new reality. And of course, jeopardizing autonomy and agency via prediction. If we think the generative I and generative AI is intelligence, we're making a really big mistake. It's not. It's not sentient. It's not intelligent. Generative mechanisms only get so advanced because they rely upon probability. We have to be very careful we realize what these tools can do, or what they're capable of doing, and not just assume that there's some kind of evil overlord. So does anyone in here who's currently teaching or has taught, any of you currently have a statement on the use of generative AI in your syllabus? Interesting, okay. May I ask, did you come about that individually, or your colleagues and you within your department came together and addressed it? How did it come about? If you don't mind sharing, I apologize.
Sure. Why not? That was easy. Our department, English department right here, we have meetings and also this is different from them as they have, I think. They have also they graded us to
Mhm.
If you add one, you can do it, or if you actually want everybody to use it.
Well, I commend you and your colleagues because myself and the rest of higher education has kind of been like, how do we approach these problems? What are these tools capable of doing? How am I going to incorporate it into my courses of study? And so you would be in the minority. Most faculty, at least to the surveys we've been able to see thus far nationally, are not yet really utilizing the statements, are not putting in there. And of course, explicit direct instruction about the expectations and obligations of a course is vitally important. It demonstrates respect. It makes sure there isn't a confused assumption that can then lead to a whole bevy of issues. So, John, would you like to talk about some attribution language?
Sure, yeah, so beyond just stating whether or not you support the use of generative AI in your class or not, if you do, we would also encourage you to put some language in around attribution. So there are ways to cite your generative AI use, especially if you're using it to complete writing assignments, research assignments. There's even ways that students can submit links. I know there's a faculty member at Lehman had students go in and use generative AI to help with some of their writing assignments, and she asked them to submit the links with the chat that they used in order to do their research. And then there also, I mean, this was put together a little bit a while ago, but the APA and MLA Chicago style guides also have attribution language. You wouldn't mind going to that.
Certainly.
So they do have examples of citing it in text. Here's an example, and then just the general format of each. So they are a little bit different. They are trying to each style guide is changing all the time, but it is something that you can attribute if you are going to incorporate it into generative AI use of your assignments.
You gotta love the APA and MLA. They always have a new book every few years that you have to then buy. I think a doorstop with like APA 3. Sorry, John. Continue, please.
No, please. So we wanted to just throw a question out there before we get into examples of how you might incorporate generative AI use into your assignments. How do you currently, if you're teaching, promote originality? Pretty good thing.
Well, since my first statement was spring of 2023, the first thing I did was demand that when they used a newspaper article, it had to be from a certain date, which I've done anyway, but that helped originality. The other thing that I did in elective classes is I sent students out to leather to do field work, which can't be done by AI yet.
That sounds like a great example of authentic learning, being out in the field, having practice, reflecting on practice that's individualized, so ChatGPT can't give some kind of bland reply that could be of use in such an assignment. That's a very interesting approach.
So there are some, we filed this list, and I highlighted a couple of examples here from this article. I believe all of these presentations will be available to you, so you'll have the link to the article, but also if you can't see it in the back. One of the major ways that you can promote originality is to have students show their work. So that means, and we'll talk about this a little bit later on in this particular section, scaffolding your written assignments, especially if they are written assignments, right? So you'll have the students provide an outline, maybe a draft of like the first couple of pages. So you're constantly giving feedback, and you're seeing if there's a major shift in their writing style, if all of a sudden they start using ChatGPT in a or their right. Again, whatever we put here, and whatever we say as an example of how to promote originality using generative AI, we're not saying that you're going to copy and paste any of these outputs that generative AI uses. We always promote that students reach out to you as the faculty member to see what your guidelines are, and if they have any questions to just confirm with you, even if it's related to studying and helping them like progress in their course. We want to make sure that it's transparent, and that is what our office usually looks at students. So one way of promoting originality or using or incorporating generative AI into your assignments, I took this is a tweet from a faculty member, I believe last summer, where he incorporated the use of generative AI, but if the students chose to use that option to use it to help with their research, their writing, they then had to submit a reflection at the end of that research, describing their experience, how they used it, why they used it, whether or not they would use it again, all that stuff. And he collected some of that data, tweeted out a series of tweets here. One of the major findings that he got from the student feedback was that they actually felt like they were cheating a little bit. Again, this was a year ago, and so who's to say that they would feel the same now? But I think the assumption is that maybe sometimes we feel like students will they're just cheating because sometimes they don't really know what cheating is, what the appropriate use of generative AI is. So I think a piece of this particular presentation that is missing is from an academic integrity officer that we usually present with, because we guys go in very depth in that process as well. Jeremy.
It is interesting too. The most viewed Chronicle article last year in the Chronicle of Higher Education was one by a student at Columbia, an undergraduate, and they were like, the title of the article was like, it's here and we're using it whether you like it or not. And you got such a varied reaction of like, oh my God, oh my God. But I mean, as President Delgado, I think, accurately noted, like it is here, but we can work together then to make an environment for assessment purposes to better serve our students and allow them to get through their courses of study and fulfill their dreams.
So I mentioned in the previous slide the reflection piece, and I went to the CUNY IT conference in November, and they actually presented a similar assignment with the presenters administered over the previous semester. And I just wanted to include this is some of the language, some of the questions that you might ask, instead of it being so abstract and what you want, a little bit more concrete person. So I think having some language about like maybe asking the students if GPT made a suggestion as to how to revise your research question, do you find the suggestion useful? Why or why not? Just a simple, like, let's have students think about their use, think about why they would use it, and how they can best implement that use in creating and crafting their own work to submit. Another way to promote originality is by scaffolding your assignments, like I mentioned. I found, again, this article that really broke down in this graph.
We'll be sharing this deck with you. I'm sorry. I know there's a lot of data on the screen right now.
Yeah.
It's a little hard to see.
Yeah, I mean, this graph really just showed, I really liked it because it showed the different types of writing assignments and how you might then scaffold those assignments. And by scaffolding, I mean having different milestones. So again, not just having a final product at the end of the semester where you're stuck kind of trying to determine whether or not a student has used ChatGPT or a generative AI tool, but rather you're seeing the progression throughout the semester on one or two major written assignments with smaller milestones throughout the semester. And then if you are going to include generative AI, we always would recommend having a criteria that focuses on the use of generative AI as well, and language around what is appropriate, what is not. I actually used generative AI to create a draft of a rubric that I would maybe implement for an assignment. I copied and pasted the instructions and the learning objectives associated with it, and it broke down the assignment in manageable and gradable chunks, which I then could revise and adapt as needed. So quickly, before we jump into some of the tools that CUNY has access to, I just wanted to get a sense from you. What instructional technology tools do you use to promote originality out of these three, or if there's a fourth? And the three are turn it in, safe assign, respond to locked in browser. Safe assign.
Okay.
Turn it in, safe assign, or like the top. Awesome. Well, this is usually, before we jump into those tools, I just wanted to highlight some of the process of what Conrad Walker, our academic integrity officer, usually speaks on, which is if you go back to the other, no, you were at this. So what he would suggest is, regardless of what whether or not you're assuming that a student has used generative AI, if you see that maybe there's a violation here, this is generally the process. Again, I can't really speak specifics to this, but we wanted to highlight the process because this is something that with scaffolding the assignments, with incorporating generative AI in your assignments, the kind of burden is what he likes to say is on you to document the case, then notify the academic integrity officer, and then a record will be kept. But the idea here is that all of these to say that you are trying to avoid this particular situation happening. We did want to find that for you. And then I guess we'll just jump to slide 28. I want to leave you with ways to promote academic integrity. Again, this is an article that we found that was really useful of just ways that you want to, if you are going to use generative AI in your assignment courses, just openly discuss it with students. Again, like we saw in those tweets, some students are afraid of generative AI themselves, are concerned about their data being used, are concerned that they are cheating, right? If you are going to use generative AI, model best behavior yourself. If you use it, maybe cite your source as well, model what that might look like for a student. Teach the skills. Don't assume just because students are more maybe tech savvy that they know what generative AI tools are out there, right? What the good prompt look like, what the bad prompt look like. Maybe create a little assignment or activity in your class based around that. And then also discuss what academic is to them. So sometimes even myself, I hear academic integrity a lot, but I don't really know, it doesn't really seem real. I don't know what to think of it. So really describing what that means, what plagiarism looks like, what work looks like, especially if you're going to incorporate these tools. And again, if you do detect violations, then just report it.
And most importantly, make sure, please, we want to hear from all of you. I learn a heck of a lot more from the CUNY community than the CUNY community learns from me. We would love to hear what you're doing in your teams, in your groups. I would have loved to know what that faculty team had done with those statements. I would have bothered them a lot to get information, try to help then other faculty groups. So please do reach out to us. We'll be sharing this with you, and we really do appreciate your time. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Who's this?
So I invite everyone to find Jonathan and John at lunchtime. And if you have any questions